Well, hello there, you beautiful, beautiful people. It's Sunday. It's Sunday, and it's actually meat and potatoes day. As you know, it's all about Sunday roasts and meat and potatoes. And with that being said, let's get straight into the meat and potatoes. So look, we've been going over the last few days the Idaho 4 case, and yesterday we touched on this Alibi situation. But in amongst the Alibi situation that, again, I said would split the room, and it certainly has split the room, there was mention of Bryan requesting or offering an ex parte hearing. And I think there's a few people out there who are curious about this. There's some people who don't quite understand what that request is all about. So look, that's what we're going to talk about very briefly, and then I'm going to let you get on your way, get you to enjoy some family time and not YouTube time. So look, it would appear that what the defence are saying, in amongst all of this, there is a clear underlying theme, and that is, look, if this would have gone the way in which it should have, in our opinion, the defence, there would have been a preliminary hearing. There was a preliminary hearing set, it had a date, and we was all going to go and we was all going to have a sit down and discussion, and it would have allowed certain things to happen. But because that was taken off of the table, the prosecution removed that. That no longer became an option, and you put us in a position where we have to function in a certain way. And I believe that the ex parte hearing offer is a way for the defence to say, look, we want to have a discussion. We want to have a discussion and address the judge so we can say pretty much what we were going to say at the preliminary hearing. Now, some people will be like, well, what is there to say? What can you say? This Alibi situation pretty much is a slam dunk for the prosecution, because he's basically saying that he was in fact in the car. And some could argue that, look, perhaps the defence have exhausted a way in which they can attack the white Hyundai Elantra situation, so they've kind of succumbed to this, look, there's no point in battling that, so we may as well just say, look, hold our hands up and say, look, we was in the car, it was you. They still have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that not only was you driving in the area, but you entered the house and done the crime. That's the way a lot of people are going to interpret that, and to be fair, that seems the most likely situation, that he was indeed driving around. But I don't think that comes as a surprise. I touched on this yesterday. Ultimately, if you go down that rabbit hole of Bryan Kohberger was just framed, and again, like I've said, framing isn't like the movies, we're not talking about this, we're just talking about that the police found someone that they were able to push forward in front of a judge and say, this is the guy. They would have had to have done some homework first to make sure that that wasn't going to fall apart. And there are clues in amongst everything that makes you, again, consider this. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% what's happened. I'm just saying that there are things happening, little small clues and nuances to things that makes you believe that the prosecution aren't 100% sure on things. And I'll tell you for why. Like the Alibi situation, that they are almost like demanding an alibi. Now, upon research, and it's quite clear why this is. Now, Idaho have this alibi demand situation set up. It's money. It's all about money. What they don't want to do is sink a load of funding into a court case that ultimately could be ended by an alibi. Someone saying it couldn't have been me, I was with Dave, and Dave is going to corroborate it, and we have a way of proving that. And this forced alibi situation manages to save money, I would imagine, in many, many cases. But if you feel that you're 100% accurate in your findings, that this person is 100% the person who did the crime, then why sink so much time and effort into demanding an alibi? because you should know by this stage, when you're taking someone to court and you are not only taking them to court, but you are seeking the death penalty for that, I would think that you would surely have to be 100% sure, unless we're saying that we could try people and technically kill them on a hunch. We believe it is. We're not 100% sure, but we think it is, beyond reasonable doubt. Well, surely they must at least beyond reasonable doubt believe that this person is the person who did the crime. But this demanding an alibi doesn't seem to promote that theory. But anyway, back to the ex parte hearing. What do we know? We know the last thing that we spoke about and were touching on before the aforementioned preliminary hearing, that there was an investigation done by someone working on behalf of the defence team, and they found information surrounding Bethany Funk that they believed was exculpatory to the client being Bryan Kohberger. They had fought to get a meeting with her, and that was about to go ahead, and then all of a sudden, yoink, gone, and here we are with a grand jury. Now, Bryan Kohberger could have indeed been driving around. He could have been doing other things. There are a multitude of things that Bryan could have been doing. Now, it could have been that he was simply night driving. Could have been. I've done it before, especially years and years ago. Not so much now because I'm in a happy relationship. I have children. I'm 43 years old. So you're probably not going to see me driving around at night because of shit and drama and issues going on around home and things like that, or feeling lonely. But people do it. People do it. And I believe that even if he'd have said that to the officers when he was initially arrested, taken in for questioning, he could have said that, and that could have bolstered their ability to do what we're potentially seeing now, and that is charging him with this crime. Because at that stage, if that was his only alibi, there you go. Anyway, I digress. But he could have been doing other stuff. He could have been involved in a different world. Now we know, and I've touched on, that this area, whether people want to stick their heads in the sand or not, they do have a narcotics issue. And Bryan Kohberger could have well been involved in that. He could have been a dealer. He could have been a collector. He could have been something involved in this, which meant that he needed multiple phones. We have evidence that would support the theory that he has multiple phones. Now, why would you have multiple phones if you're a psychopath and you're just stalking people and you're eventually going to go into someone's home and eradicate everyone in the house? That doesn't mean that you need a secondary phone unless you're liaising with somebody else. Now, these could just be old phones. It could be old phones that are not being used, who knows? But ultimately, the paperwork alludes to the fact that there are multiple phones with active numbers. There are varying numbers. So it wouldn't say that's an old handset not used and he's took his SIM card or the eSIM and transferred it to another phone. They listed other numbers, which to me goes hand in hand with a burner phone. And burner phone, when I think of burner phone, I think of, right, this is my everyday phone that I don't mind people seeing me use and I can take and make calls on. And then this other phone that I use for stuff that is separate from my everyday life. So there are little things, little clues that would point to the fact that perhaps Bryan Kohberger was involved in something different. And maybe this ex parte hearing is to start discussing that world. And this is something very, very important to consider. And that is that if Bryan Kohberger is indeed innocent, which we have to, if we're doing right by him, is to keep the assumption of innocence until proven otherwise. And if that's the case, we at this stage must feel that there could potentially be another killer. Or killers. And that's something very, very important to understand. Now, some people take all of this case as entertainment. They use it to push certain things and force their communities into thinking the same way as them and seeing the same way as them. But the reality is we don't have a convicted person in all this. We have someone who definitely looks like he could be guilty, but there are some questions surrounding said guilt. But make no bones about it, without that conviction and with these questions that do linger overhead, there is a potential that someone else is involved. And I know what people are going to think. They're going to think, well, if that's the case, then why wouldn't someone go and kill somebody else? Why aren't we seeing any other people being murdered? And my answer to that is, why would they? If they think they can get away with this because this person is going to take the rap, then they're going to remain very quiet for a little while at least until the trigger's pulled. But if Bryan Kohberger didn't do it, someone else did. But for him to come forward and say he is willing to have an ex parte hearing, it means that he has something to say. It does mean that he has something to push forward, that he wants to have listened to, he wants to have considered. And there are only so many things that can be, but it does seem to be something that he wants to keep away from the prosecution. And again, maybe we'll learn of it, maybe we won't. But it'd be interested to know what you guys think. What could there potentially be, what Bryan Kohberger wants to say, but he doesn't want to say in front of the prosecution? Or is this just a bit of tit for tat? You took away the preliminary hearing, you done the secret grand jury, so this is our variation of that, where we're now going to start doing stuff behind your back and see how you like it. Seems a little bit, like I say, tit for tat and game playing, and we know that in cases like this there can be game playing, but I just find it very, very interesting that Bryan Kohberger did indeed offer it, which would, in my opinion, mean that he has something to say. And look, this isn't about proving whether Bryan Kohberger was driving around Moscow, Idaho that night. It wasn't about that. It's about, did Bryan Kohberger enter into this property and do this crime at the time with which we are now, and I say now because that time has changed, but at the time we're led to believe it happened, because it's the time of the crime that ties everything together. And it's the time of the crime and the constraint of such, which is what ties the Atlanta into it. But how do we know that that specific time is indeed when this all happened? How do we know? How do we absolutely know beyond a reasonable doubt that the murders actually took place between, say, 12 minutes past 4 and 19 minutes past 4, which would be your actual time window? How do we know? Especially when earlier on in this situation, the coroner would lead you to believe that the murders took place at least an hour earlier. But again, I know that I'm not a professional. Let me know down below what you think. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, you amazing, amazing people. Thank you for giving me some time, and I will catch you all tomorrow.